Hello, everyone. So this is the first video lecture on the chapter of disorders. And in this chapter, we're going to cover sort of the broad definition of what we mean by psychological disorders. And then I want to get into some of the basics about some of the specifics of disorders. First thing I always like to say, though, when we start the topic is I think it's important. Sorry, here, I got to get some stuff adjusted on my screen. It's important to remember or to consider that disorders are what we would call they're a social construct and they're culturally variable. So there's no the textbook definition when we think about what disorders are is they're patterns of behavior that are considered abnormal or considered not adaptive for the culture, that particular culture at that particular place and time. But a couple really important ideas I want to point out. And so I kind of get on this little soapbox about don't let somebody come and wag their finger at you and tell you that you have a problem, right? Unless right here in this definition, here's a definition: a pattern of behavioral or psychological symptoms that cause significant personal distress. Right? Sometimes someone may try to tell us that we have a problem, we have a personality disorder, or we're depressed, but it's only going to matter once it starts to interfere with our life. It doesn't matter what other people say, right? What they're usually complaining about is maybe you're making their life hard, but only when it begins to affect our life, right? That's when people tend to do something about it. Maybe you're familiar with the concept of an intervention. So your personal distress. And the next really important part is it impairs the ability to function. So if whatever's going on in your head and your emotional and your psychological well-being begins to get in the way of you accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish, right, then maybe we should speak to somebody, right? Then maybe you should consider learning more about it. But just because maybe you're difficult to live with, or maybe you're emotional and someone wags their finger and says you have a problem, you don't need to believe them, right? However, there are some disorders that are characterized by people ignoring what other people say, but that's the very last of this chapter. Okay, so we have this big book. This is called the DSM, and there is a quiz question about what a DSM stands for, and that is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the 4th edition. Look how thick that is, right? Look at that. It's got how many pages in it? It's got 875 pages before you get to the index. The number 4, right? And that's a quiz question 2. What does the number 4 or the number 5 mean? That means this is the 4th edition. This is the old edition. Currently, we're on the 5, and that's what the screen says on here. It's a Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 5. It's in its 5th edition. Here's the reason that I say that this is a social construct, because we are now on and this is the big book that has all of the disorders, has all of the labels, has the symptoms of the labels. This is like the go-to manual, right? And how professionals figure out what is wrong is that the fact that it's on the 5th means that the professionals have changed their mind 5 times, right? What is in the book changes. For instance, in the 4th book, I actually got this from my therapist's office. I was in her office and I said, oh, I would really like to have that. She just gave it to me, right? In the 4th book, we have Asperger syndrome and autism, and they're separate. In the 5th book, it's considered autism spectrum disorder. They've changed their mind. In like number 3, actually, I don't know if it was number 3 or number 2, homosexuality was in the book as a disorder. It's no longer in the book, right? I believe number 4 has sex addiction. One of them has sex addicts as a thing, but the current diagnostic manual does not have sex addicts as a thing, right? So the notion that what is considered disorder, it changes over time. But it doesn't mean that the manual should be discounted, because this is a very important tool for professionals. It creates a shared language, right? And because it's built by consensus, people, experts in the field, come together and say, you know, we're seeing a lot of this particular behavior, or we don't really think that this is disordered anymore. So I want to emphasize a concept here around, I want to emphasize the concept of disordered, right? That is a, and if I were to talk to some of my clinician friends, I'm sure they would completely disagree with me, but that is a value judgment. What is considered disordered as opposed to what is considered orderly. And I'll talk about more of that in just a second. Okay, so this slide simply is about the number of people that get a label that is in this book, right, or in the blue book. And basically at any given time, about half of us would qualify, would have enough behaviors and emotional symptoms to qualify for a label. Most people will just live their life and deal with it, and they won't bother to actually go to a professional and get a label. And many of the conditions that are in this book show up when you're in your 20s. That is a quiz question. I will actually make reference to that a couple more times, right? Somewhere around your 20s, your mid to late. If you, I like to say, if you've gotten to 30 and you've not had an emotional breakdown, you've not had depression, you've not had anxiety or panic attack, you're probably good to go. Most of that stuff appears then, but this all kind of makes sense, right? Because you remember your brain develops from the back to the front, and your frontal lobe is not fully formed until your mid to late 20s. Okay, women and men appear to suffer from different conditions. This could be as much a function that women are more likely to seek help, so they're more likely to get a label. It could be a function of the socialization of men and women, but the general pattern is women are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Men are more, men are more likely to be involved in using substances or antisocial disorders. Antisocial disorders, that's towards the end of these chapter lectures, but I want to start right now and begin to emphasize antisocial does not mean you don't like to be with people. Antisocial has nothing to do with socializing. It has nothing to do with being with people. What it means to be antisocial is that it's the opposite of pro-social. Pro-social is doing things that help people. Pro-social is helping. Antisocial is harming people. So either somewhere in this chapter you have a scale, an antisocial personality scale. And don't be confused. This does not mean you like to hang out in your apartment by yourself. That is not what antisocial means. To be antisocial means you do things that are harmful to people. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. And in the next video lecture, I will talk about anxiety disorders.